Good morning, everybody. Well, one of the really important things to know about the workplace is that the science is really very clear. We're both terrible bosses and terrible employees, so wherever we get in this kind of scenario, we all probably need help, okay? So resilience, you hear it all the time, don't you? Whenever someone's got something going wrong, it's how resilient, Mrs. May at the moment, Prime Minister, how resilient she's being because of all these setbacks. And there's this kind of focus on resilience as always being about how you come back from something. Okay, and so the scale of what you're dealing with is often part of a challenge, but I really want to encourage you to not think about people being resilient. I think we can think about people in context being resilient because the context is helping. If people have to be resilient and the context is not helping, that's not a great workplace, okay? So I'll try and show you these are the two principal things. So if you take nothing else away from today, this is it. Okay, this is what the presentation is about. The first thing we need to understand is that in an information-rich society, the quality that becomes most demanded and most hard to command is the attention of other people. So instead of economics, think of attentionomics. Okay, and we've got two principal ways that we have of deploying or paying our attentions, because it costs us to pay attention. Okay, there's what's in us that seems very important to us that we project into the world. And then there's what's in the world that's coming in on us. So I'll give you an example of something that's commanded your attention right now. Why do you think you're sitting down? There are two principal reasons. One, because there was a chair, and two, because other people did it. That's the outside coming into you. You're probably not that motivated to sit, but you all do it. Okay, so that's kind of an example. So this idea of attentionomics, it's hard to command people's attention on the things that matter sometimes, okay? And then this other slide, which is somewhat enigmatic, isn't it? Yeah, so N, big N, and X, okay? That's the formula for resilience in the workplace and performance in the workplace. If you get that right, you're in business. Now, I'll say more about it as you go through, but it's a bit intriguing, isn't it? You know, NNX. Do you think you could remember that? NNX. Try it for yourself in your head, all right? So that's the talk. Okay, so what we know is that for workplace, you have an idea of how success takes place. So this is your kind of framework, your core theory of success. So it's something to do with relationships, it's something to do with the quality of the thinking that happens there, quality of the actions and the quality of the results. Okay, and when it doesn't go well, it kind of gets to look something like that, doesn't it? You know, it's everybody else's fault, and no one's really taking it on board, and so on. Okay, this is some of the challenge that we have. What that tells us is that how we are in context creates a further context. So it's interacting all the time, okay? And that's a typical kind of response. So when it's not going well, you get a bit like a porcupine, you get all your spikes up and you make sure you get protected, because that's how we are, okay? And it's even worse than that, because you could combine this with a skunk and you become a skunky pine, because not only do you get prickly, but you stink, you know? So, okay, so Piaget, who's a famous educationist, described an educated person as someone who knows what to do when they don't know what to do. This works brilliantly for a resilient individual as well, and a resilient organisation, where your processes are flexible and adaptable. The individuals are flexible and adaptable to circumstances that you don't know what they're going to be. Okay, you think, well, why do we need that now? Well, we've never had a world where the demands on employees and employers have been so fluid. We've never had that. Okay, because the world markets are changing, the economies are in flux, you know, the European situation, we know about local economies, etc. They all start to play out. So we have a lot of working parts and they're all interfering with one another. So what's the dominant part in there? The answer is you can't tell. Because if we want to imagine that the workplace is a transaction, I pay you for some work and you deliver that work, you're 150 years out of date, okay? The work is not about a transaction, it's an interaction. And it's an interaction between the employee and the things they're interested in, the things the employers are interested in, and then what people bring into that from elsewhere, okay? So it's really all about interactions, right? And there are thousands of them. There are thousands of working parts, okay? So it's not like an engineering flowchart which says, does it move? No. Should it? No. No problem. Yes. Use WD-40. If it should move, or shouldn't move, then you use duct tape. It's not that simple, right? There's a lot more to it than that, okay? But some people want to distill it down to this. So the employees see it like that. They feel like they're being squeezed. Okay, Okay? The employers think they're having to push the elephant up the stairs, and it's perpetual, and the elephant's getting heavier all the time, and so on, okay? What we know about resilience is that it's a morality-free zone, okay? It doesn't matter what you're trying to be resilient about, okay? So there are people on there that make your skin creep. That's not my point here. It's morality-free. So there are people who demonstrate qualities of resilience, which is bouncing back from adversity and so on. And then there are circumstances which I've tried to put around the outside. So this is a flooded town where that circumstance takes over. How do you respond to that kind of thing? So those are some of our challenges that we're dealing with. So think about who you're dealing with. If you're working with youth groups, we've never had so much of a concern about the mental well-being of youth now. We have a suicide epidemic in young people, and one of the things that we think is really responsible for that is how young people are developing through their own kind of social networks. What we know is that children are supposed to be brought up by adults, and they're being brought up by other children. That's the problem with social media. It's not social media per se. Social media makes them brilliant curators. They know where to find loads and loads of stuff that people of my age haven't got a clue. We know some stuff, but then we try to become curators as well. So we're double bound. That's a real challenge for us. Okay? Then people get sick. That creates a whole set of resilient sets of issues. For employers, that means that people are off work. How do we cover the work? For the people being sick, it has consequences for them. That may be long term. So this example here is a stroke. And then you could go to more micro things. There is a thing called micro-resilience. So micro-resilience, in a typical day, how do you get to work? Well, you'd think the commute doesn't make that much difference, wouldn't you? Okay, let me show you. This is from the Harvard Business School out last week. Okay, it's how long do people like to commute? And this is US data, all right, where I've tried to update it with the European and UK data. The ideal commute is 16 minutes. But the reality is in the Americas, it's 38 minutes. For us in Europe, it's 38 minutes. But for us in England or Britain, it's 54 minutes. So you say, okay, we're doing more commuting than we'd like. Is that starting the day off badly? Well, let me see if I can show you. It's more stressful, so that people arrive at work if they characterize by this. Now, characterize weak self-control, it makes them sound like they're weak people. I don't mean that, but it's how they look on the day and how they engage with the day. So if it's people who kind of don't really have a plan, they're just going to work, or people who are coming to the train journey or whatever else it is in a bad state. Okay, so what do you do about that? Well, here's an interesting set of things. Things to stop doing if you're one of those people. And I'm on the train this morning, we were on the train this morning, weren't we? How many people did we see on social media? Every other person, weren't they? All looking at their emails. Now, if they are people who've got that conflict and low self-control, you can see we've got some challenge here, as opposed to some good things to do, which are really about the future. And one of the challenges we have here is low resilience is characterized by an indwelling in the moment as it unfolds, and it's just nothing else. You don't think about anything else. So put your headphones on and just love it. Just love it. Just love it. Instead of, where's the future? Well, where's something going on? So we're trying to get people to think a little bit more about the future because it activates a different part of the brain. So let me show you the patterns of resilience, because you'll know something about this, okay? So we know it's a chemical kind of, your brain is wet electricity, if you want to think about it like that, and it's about the chemicals and how they interplay. So let's try and think of events as being severe, moderate, or mild, and then time, okay? This is how we'd understand resilience in kind of different ways. So this is ongoing. Chronic means long-standing, okay? That this is long-standing and severe. So you might think someone in a war who'd been in a war would have that. And that's right. There are people who've been in a war would have that. But there will be just as many people in a war who don't have that. So then what might they have? Okay, so there's a growth or a test period there. Then we have people who have some sort of event, but it's a delayed response. And you've seen that, I'm sure. So that's a second pattern. Then there's slow recovery. This is the equivalent of children who gets knocked off their bike, 10-year-olds who get symptoms of post-traumatic stress who go to the A&E. This is the kind of recovery they demonstrate. That's 1 in 3 of those kids have post-traumatic stress for a while, but it gets better. Okay, that's the third recovery. And then there's the kind of the more normal one that we'd like to see a lot of the time, which is it knocks you about a bit, but you can still function well and you can thrive, okay? So what we're trying to think about there, 4 patterns, but look at the different ouch periods. They're very different, aren't they? Now, I couldn't tell you what would make someone have a severe reaction. You know, if someone died in your family today who was important to you, which pattern would it be? We don't know the answer to that. We know things that are going in there, but we don't know what they all are. So remember that slide as we go through. It's what's inside coming out and what's outside coming in. And it's a function of trying to put those things together, what's personally relevant and socially reinforced inside a workplace that is characterized by this: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I'm sure those of you who are running companies, etc., will know exactly what I mean when I'm describing that. It's a changing world which it poses different demands on employees and on your systems, okay? So we've got those 2 attentionomic systems, we've got this outside world, and we've got the strong likelihood that as a protective mechanism, we could do this porcupine kind of thing, okay? So if you don't believe that's it, so this is from Harvard Business Review last year. How many people, so this is 4 in 10, this is 6 in 10 of 850 or 830 Britain's employees. What you can see here, just have a quick look at those sorts of things. I think you'd say change and people that you're having to deal with are at the root of how it's understood for British employees. Okay, so what are we like as humans when we go in there? In this stuff, I know some of you have seen this before, but I make no apologies for repeating it. You might not want to believe what I'm about to tell you, but they are principles that are so powerful, even if you want to ignore them, they're coming for you. So you can ignore them if you want, but they are coming, all right? The employee is someone in development, okay? But the employee often thinks they're fully developed. We know that as humans, our brains are continually remodeling, and this is one of the kind of big aspirations that we see now in the youth kind of employee group about this need for personal growth in the employment scenario. They will sacrifice salaries sometimes for growth experiences. They see that as being very important, okay? But this is universal. We have 3 times more brain tissue allocated to the avoidance of threat than we do to seeking of reward, which is to say it's way easier to demotivate people than it is to motivate them because they see the threat in something very readily, okay? If you are practiced, if you come from environments where resources are hard to come by and you are practiced in finding threat because you have to maintain very scarce resources, you become ultra vigilant. So if people come from rough parts of town where money is sometimes hard to cap and you try and keep onto it, any single thing that might represent a threat there, it sets this mechanism running, okay? So that's what motivation is, because that's, your brain is there to keep you alive. That's the principal threat to keeping you alive. So in the absence of physical threat, what are we left with? So let's assume that you're not going to be attacked or murdered or whatever. What are you left with? Because you're left with this brain that's going to do this. And where the predominant concern for us now is the social judgment of others. Does my arse look big in this? Is this a good colour for me? You know, and of course my arse does look big in this, and this is the wrong colour for me, but who cares, you know? It's the wrong red, isn't it? It's too florid, but never mind, you know. Yeah, you learn these things, don't you? So that gives us then rise to this kind of sequence about how we can get attention to work. If we start with the idea of what emotion is operating with an individual, you have to pay attention to emotions. That's their purpose. They're momentary, fleeting experiences. They're internal. You must pay attention to them, especially negative emotions. If the negative emotions get produced in this part of the brain, in the back here, or sorry, in the middle, the chemicals that result have to be dealt with in the front. And the front has very limited resource. This is what's immediate. This is what's the future. This is future focused part. When this is dominant, this stops working properly. So imminent, you're stuck in the moment. So you heard of fight, flight, or freeze? That's what that is. That's its function, okay? So we have attention, or emotion drives attention. Once we know where attention is, we know what you can learn. If you're looking over there and the action's over there, you know where we are, and then that drives performance. So you can see where it starts with emotion, and I think that's really important to understand. So let me show you a little bit more about that. So this is a sideways view. Here are your eyes, and this is your ponytail down here. Okay, so you've got this little bit here. This is called the prefrontal cortex. This is the clever part that thinks about the future. It's got some really cool things in it. It's all those things that you like to do well in exams, etc. School likes this. University likes this. This is what this is supposed to be about, okay? But your emotions are created in this kind of bit here. So what happens when these negative emotions get created? You get a cascade that goes forward, chemical cascade, which stops those functions from happening. So inhibit is stopping yourself from doing stupid things. So driving at 60 miles an hour in a 30 mile an hour zone, which I'm sure you've seen wherever you go with someone in a car that's too much for them. So none of those things work properly. But here, look at the chronic conditions that create that as well. Yeah? So people are stressed, sad, lonely, or interestingly enough, physically unfit. So this now starts to, we could look at our employees or look at ourselves and say, these are things maybe that I'm experiencing. I need to do something about that, because that will allow my prefrontal cortex to work better. Just because it's not dealing with the chemicals that are being produced by these negative emotions. Okay? So here you have a picture of some brains from the top. Okay? So this is where your eyes are. This is where your ponytail is. If it's brightly colored, it's doing a lot. We think it's using a lot of oxygen. Okay, so that's what's happening in there. If it's blue, it's not doing much, but it's doing something. And if it's gray, it's not active at all. All right, so what you see here is this is resilient coping. So whatever this person is dealing with, the prefrontal cortex, that thing that's dealing with future-focused, inhibition, etc., that's all operating really, really nicely. Okay, there's nothing happening in the person here who said, oh, let's just do something. I'm not trying to work it out, I'm just going to do something. And what you're seeing here is light action around what does it feel like to be me in this situation. That's not thinking ahead, that's experiencing what's going on now. You feel that? So this person's got a much more adaptive kind of frame of mind, or way of operating. This is a low adaptive frame of mind, okay? We need this when we're dealing with work where we need deep focus, where a lot of employee scenarios now are people finish the day and someone asks them, what did you do today? I don't know, but I was busy as hell all day. And you've had that. Okay, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people to look into, especially white collar work, to think about how do I get deep work done, and how do I break the day up so that I get 20-minute blocks or I get 90-minute blocks. Okay, and how do I resist the 150 times that I have to inhibit myself from looking at my mobile phone? How many times have you thought about your mobile phone so far during this? No, it's all right. No, it's all right. But it's so beguiling, isn't it? And every time you pick up your mobile phone, you break your concentration from one of your 20-minute blocks or one of your 90-minute blocks. We must have systems which encourage people to do this deep work. And it's actually to put things around people so they don't have to remember, because this has got limited resource. That memory bit to not do something or to stop doing something exists here. It's not here, so you've got to activate it, and it's costly. Okay? So remember, choosing costs. If you want those things to happen, it's going to cost. The less we make it cost you personally, that we can put something around you that helps you to do what you want, the better it is. That's about clever workplace design. Okay, so what you have here, so great sources of book. And if you go on for a TED talk, put in Daniel Levitin, fantastic, explains it beautifully. Your prefrontal cortex has got limited resource, don't expect it to remember everything. So when I go to a meeting and I see people my age, and they haven't got a notebook, I know I'm not going to be working with them for very long. Because they don't have good memories, and they don't know that a workbook is to extend the capacity of this. They will not remember. which is why you'll always see me, wherever I am, my book, the students laugh at me, go, oh yeah, don't have a laptop or whatever. Well, I do, but I show them my book all the time to emphasize how old and stupid I am. But the point is, there's a process here, and it's deliberate. It extends my prefrontal cortex because it's limited, which is, for all the guys in the room, all those nails and spanners and stuff that you've got downstairs, or wherever you've got them, screws, bolts, chuck them all away. Buy an organized system, because you don't remember where anything good is. Right? Just buy an organized system. That's because your prefrontal cortex isn't good. That's why we emphasize, for that lady who wanted to do something, how do we get you to do 20-minute things? A structure that's around you to do 20-minute things. Or if it's 90 minutes, how do we create a structure that makes it easy for you to do it? So you don't have to make it very difficult. So we would talk about a high road and a low road. So you can see a high road to thinking your way through things and a low road to thinking through things, which is kind of related to those pictures before about the images of the brain in operation. So a low road, something comes along and says to you, something at work says, something's wrong. It might not be terrible, all right, but it's not that great, okay? So a low road response is do what feels right. Do what feels right for me. Don't think about it, just do what feels right. And the high road, if we can talk about it like that, is do what's most needed and then try and make sure that fits in with what everybody else needs as well. You can see that, that's a more complicated and a more developed idea. So that process is reflected there, and that process is reflected there. Okay, so it's called a low road, and it's not really that functional or adaptive, and we're trying to get people away from that. So that's the kind of porcupine or skunky pine kind of idea. We're trying to get people away from that kind of experience. And if anger's kind of something in the workplace, you get that. Remember, the prefrontal cortex is dominated by emotion chemicals. So if people are angry, the chemicals flood forward. Nobody performs well when they're mad. That's the consequence. So what behaviors do we need to put into place? So all of these behaviors change your brain structure. Okay? All of them. So what have you done today that surprised you? How much physical activity have you had already? I've walked probably 45 minutes this morning. That's good, isn't it? So that's remodeling my brain. That helps me with emotional regulation. That is very useful for my overall bodily functions, etc. But you see, we've got to get all these things. I said it was complicated. There's lots of moving parts. So, some things inside your head. Decide if you're good or not at it. Give yourself one if you're good at it. Okay? These are inner things that you do using these little cameras in here. If you're good at these things, you're really in a good way of going. Do you watch yourself carefully? And do you keep score? Have you got a little table of scores about how well you did last week? Because people who know my book know I have a table of scores running back years. Every week, at the end of every day, write down a score for how well I did against 6 criteria. Do you set lead goals? Now, a lead goal is a goal which, if I do this, I will achieve that. So an example for me as an academic is if I do 25 minutes of reading, that will give me a chance of doing 25 minutes of writing because I've got something to write about. The ideas don't come from nowhere. They've got to be springboarded off something else. That would be a lead goal, something that leads you to something good. Okay? Do you record your successes anywhere? Not just in your head, formally record them. Do you learn from setbacks through active reflection? What happened? What would we do better next time? And do you prompt and cue yourself to do good behavior? So if I want you to be physically active, what would I do with the chairs in this room? I'd take them away because that's the wrong cue. Okay, so you see where we are? Do you create that? So that's about environmental structuring. If you can get all those 5 things in place, you really are lining up your inner resources in a tremendous way to be successful. Okay, so connect with yourself a little bit more. Count the black dots. How many have you got so far? There aren't any, are there? Yeah, there are bloody hundreds. They can't get away from them. Yeah, that's you, isn't it? That's what we're like. as humans, all right? You didn't know I had that power over you, did you? This is the habit brain. We're designed to do things on autopilot, but we don't see the error in what we're doing or the way in which it controls us. And you got it wrong, didn't you? Because you don't read it. You imagine you read it. How about that? I'll read the first line, see if you can do. The phenomenal power of the human mind shows that the order of the letters in a word doesn't matter. The only important thing is that the first and the last letter are in the right place. See if you can read the rest. Isn't that genius? That's the power of your habit brain, which is designed expressly to save the resources of your clever brain. This bit at the front. We move things from here because they're new to here, they're habits, but then we make errors in the way we deploy them. Okay? And here's an example of an error. This is toothbrushing. Can you spot the error? And we all do it, don't get me wrong. Right? The error is here. The whole point about toothbrushes and toothpaste is to put fluoride on your teeth. So when you rinse your mouth, you rinse the fluoride off your teeth that the toothpaste designers work so hard to put on your teeth. So now you know what the behavior change challenge is? Stop rinsing. And now you see, by 10:15 tonight, when most of you are in bed, you might remember this, you go, oh no, he got me again. So we need to understand it. We all understand that we're all individual and we understand the world completely distinctively. So that, despite all these common processes that I've just shown you, and everyone will be going, God, yeah, that is me, and everyone else is going, God, that's me, but we're all distinctive as well. So we've got to deal with all this kind of stuff here. So we've got to be more human-centered. So why am I showing you a picture of a cat, a dog, and a rabbit? Because I'm not showing you a picture of a cat, a dog, or a rabbit. That was your brain thinking it knew what that was. What do you think that is? Or that? Or that? Look past the immediacy and see the people, see the human. Think what we're like, all of us, and start to design in that way, to think about what we're good at. So how do we interact with work? So easy reading, difficult reading, free. Okay, go online and get that, it's free. All right, so I'll tell you a little bit about some of these things, right? But these are not terribly difficult books. I mean, that's the only difficult book, in an academic sort of sense. The rest of them, everybody can read comfortably. If you want easy stuff, put that woman's name into YouTube. You'll get a brilliant talk from her about the progress principle. Right, absolutely fabulous. She's called Teresa Amabile. Do you want to take a picture of that, ma'am? Okay. Remember, that one is free, and that is about the best government-inspired report I can think about for a better employee performance. Right? So what we're trying to do in the workplace to make people resilient is to create conditions which allow people to do their best work. So there's nothing very clever about that, but we'd all understand that. Okay, so let's think about where we could go for this. Another freebie, if you wanted it, but I'm going to pick up that book called Social Physics. Now, in social physics, Alex Pentland, who's at MIT, asked people in organisations to wear a little lapel badge, which was actually a recording device. So you could hear what people were talking about and who talked to who and with what kind of tone and when people were talking over one another and all this kind of stuff. And we're trying to identify the factors that are most about performance, organisational performance. This is money, right? Which companies did best? Okay, so I'll show you what he came up with. Okay, and this fits with this report as well. So he said it came up with 3 E factors. Does this ring a bell? Okay, the E factors, sorry, I don't know why this come off here. Energy, engagement, exploration. Those are the 3 factors that determine 2/3 of the economic performance of given organisations. Really important stuff, right? Now, do you remember the list of why British people get kind of a bit pissed off with work? Do you remember what it was? It was about other people. What do you think that is? Engagement. Okay, that's your biggest factor by far that we can predict out of this data. Okay, it's US data, so you might argue, well, maybe it doesn't quite apply to us, right? But you see, the two factors that explain 1/3 of the variations just on their own, this is between 10 and 20% energy. Engagement is about 30%, and then the scale of exploration is about 10% of the variance. Okay, so these are very powerful factors. Okay, now what we know about this engagement thing is that's a very big factor for us as humans because we are socially oriented. This part of the brain is really interested in what do other people think about me. That's way more powerful than this part of the brain. This dominates. So in this room, you're looking around thinking, yeah, what do other people think? You're thinking about what they think of you. Okay, so keep that in mind. Energy, engagement, exploration. Okay, so let's look at it a little more clearly. If this is true, if this is sickness absence, what you can see here is Yorkshire is kind of a little bit above kind of the rest of the country, apart from the northeast. So something's not quite right. We've got this scale of absenteeism. Okay, stress-related absence on the rise. And what do people find the explanation? Workload. Okay, management style. So other people. That engagement. You find that coming up. So it's hard for us, if those things are not right, to be resilient. It's hard for us to perform well, okay? From an employer perspective, one of the big problems is that they don't show up to work. And that becomes erratic, and that's then hard for the other people who are at work to deal with. Of course, then you've got the other factor of people who are not fit to work who show up. Called presenteeism, because then it's about your coat being on the back of the chair. That's much more important. They're not doing anything. And the costs seem to be something like 4 to 5 times greater for presenteeism than for absenteeism. So that's a really big issue. So when they're at work, we need to do something. But the principal thing that we find is the responsibility for dealing with this in the workplace lies in the middle. It's often not at the top. You know, especially not in big organizations. In smaller organizations, they're middle out. Okay, that's what they're referred to. Middle out, not bottom up, middle out. Okay, so your middle managers are the really important figures here. So, and this is a paper I came across yesterday, and it's only out a couple of days, but they talk about this thing called the middle managers being umbrella carriers. Okay, so they do that for everybody else is the idea. They try and stop the nonsense that's coming down, but also stop whatever's coming up, you know, so that they're trying to keep it together. So these people seem to be really important, and they may be the people who really need special initiatives in your organisation, because they're getting it at both sides. And how do they maintain themselves while they're doing that? Remember, energy, engagement, exploration applies to the umbrella carriers as well. Okay, so what's your organisation like? Well, the clues are given away in the language about how people describe it. Okay? So there's an example here. Pentland would concur with this idea. This is a really easy book if you did want to read something. You can get PDFs of tribal leadership. You don't have to buy it. It tells you everything you need to know. But it goes through 5 stages of where your work is. So think about how people describe where you work. First one is it sucks there. In earlier times, you die there. So an example would be mining 120 years ago or something like that. You know, there's a physical threat, you die. Okay. But in the absence of that threat, it's just that you are alienated and you don't like it. The second stage is my life sucks and you're to blame, which is always a nice one to have if you want to get yourself off the responsibility. Stage 3, I'm great, but in demonstrating that, I've got to show how you're not. So universities are like that, ironically enough. Isn't that mad? Yeah, because there's only so many promotion places and so on, so you get that idea. Stage 4 is partnership. We're great, but then we've got to find someone else who's not. We still have to do that. So highbrow, red brick universities do a good bit of that. And then stage 5, life is great. And we're trying to make the world better. So there aren't many companies that are stage 5. If you want to read about stage 5, probably the best place would be An Everybody Culture by Richard Kegan, which is really about one of the 5 companies worldwide they've identified as what are called deliberately developmental, where all their processes are designed to improve the performance of all their employees. You think what that means? That means everybody scoring everybody at every meeting. Seriously, that's what it involves. It's serious stuff. But remember, energy, engagement, exploration. What do you see there? Do you see engagement in these early stages? No, you see isolation, and you see isolation very quickly decided upon by the people imagining they're being isolated. We find the threat in something very quickly. If you want to know more about social processes, this is fantastic. It's not an easy read, okay, I'll tell you that now, but it is really fabulous. And one of the really important things this guy talks about is the importance of getting away from competition to enhance performance between colleagues as opposed to comparison. And there's a really important set of differences there, but it's very, very sharp and well written. So what about your organisation? What do people say about what you're expected to do there? Are you always on? Always available organisation? Well, let me show you what that does if you're in the galley crew here, where you can see it's rowing. Well, just for a bit of variety, we'll have some aerobics, but then we're back into rowing. Okay, so the culture is high effort and low reward. If you can think of, if people would say that about where you are, we'll call that the toxic quarter. So let me show you what that looks like. It has all of these bad heart cardiovascular scenarios, okay? Then over here, the OR is an odds ratio. Odds ratio in the normal population is 1. If it's above 1, you've got an elevated risk. So if you work in that zone, the odds are you're twice as likely to have current heart disease as someone who doesn't work there. You're 2.5 times, as a woman, you're 2.5 times, sorry, that's a man, you're 2.5 times more likely to develop a new psychiatric disorder. This is on top of the ones you've already got, of course, but, and then 70% more for the ladies. Subclinical heart disease, 2 to 6 times the risk. Risk for future heart disease, 8 times higher. Stay there if you want. And then the big one, nearly 14 times higher for depression. Are we clear where we are in terms of how the workplace could be part of where the drive for depression, or the causal factors, or some of the causal factors in relation to depression might lie? Okay, so we can start and look at an organisation and start and say, well, okay, we could say what's wrong with somebody, a group, whatever, but we could also look at its assets and try and build what we think are some of the features of resilient organisations. And they're all things that will make absolute sense to you. So you can see here, you can look at this at an individual level, things that you'd like to do, and then things at an organisational level. You go, yeah, of course, who wouldn't want to do that? Okay, so let me tell you something about organisations then, about why they don't learn this stuff. Because they are humans. They are run by humans who suffer from the habits that you had, that you wash the fluoride off your teeth, you rush to judgment about reading things that you think you know what it says, and these are the things where organisations rush towards. They bias towards success rather than trying to learn from the failures that are there, because the failures are very rich. But we've got this bias towards success and people who are successful. Those people are also terribly active. So we have a bias towards action, and we don't spend enough time thinking about things. Slowing it down is part of what deep work is all about. We have a bias towards fitting in rather than someone who's got an unusual perspective that might really unlock something for you. Fitting in is more important than standing out in lots of organisations. Then the final thing is we have a bias towards experts, so you roll out someone like me to tell you what to do, and actually the bloke in the corner there who's worked there for 40 years knows way better than me. But you wouldn't possibly ask him because he's not an expert. And there's just humans. This is how we are as humans. This is part of explaining why we don't get all the development that we really need. If we do get the developments we need, we can start and look at these kind of the assets idea and start to say, well, our program for doing something about that might look like that, and our program, so you get a comprehensive kind of approach. That's a really exciting place to be. You'd be thinking this is really good. Or if you took a single behavior that you're interested in, you just say sleep. We're going to focus on sleep. Remember, it was one of the 5 behaviors that do brain remodeling? Right, so you say, right, we're going to do that. And we're going to make sure that we have a sleep focus because we see it making a difference to all of these areas that really matter. Okay, but here's reality. This conference was last week, the Working Human. You can see percentage reporting new ideas are met with skepticism or hostility. So this is organisations less than 100. 54% of those people responding to that said that a new idea was met with skepticism. As the organisation gets bigger, the skepticism rises. Resistance is inbuilt to human functioning. The more we are with other people, the more that resistance comes out because we have to fit in. That's part of how we work with ourselves, okay? Recognition is absolutely vital. What I'd like to point out to you on this slide, 2 out of 3 people say they were not recognized even once last year. Okay? Look at the value of 1 minute. So that's 1 minute on a clock. And then you get 100 minutes. See it whirling around twice? You get 100 minutes payback in terms of energy put into new ideas from that employee. 1 minute for 100 return. It's a fabulous winner, isn't it? But it's about relationships. Engagement is where that action is. So let me show you this one. This one came out last week. It's work from Canada, USA, South Africa, and the UK. Okay, and the summation of it was, here you go. Most employees have not been recognised recently. They don't feel psychologically safe, but it varies. Psychologically safe, can I put my ideas out? It varies by gender and by position. So you've got the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion counts, you know, that kind of storyline. So this is consistent wherever you go now. We're seeing it across the Western world, same kind of thing. So what can you do about it? Well, great book if you want it. I'm going to pick on the 6 things. Well, you can see it's got 6 things. My key thing here is commit to the human imperative. The human imperative is really simple. Is my heart in it? If we want resilience, we must have their heart in it. We must do everything we can for heart to be in it. Okay? What are our choices for doing that? So this is really interesting. This is McKinsey from a couple of years ago. They're trying to work out what's the most important things to do. Not just you could do all this. Well, here's a list. They've got them. These are the best things. These are the least good, but they're still good. I'll pick them out for you. What they want are these things. They're calling that direction. They wanted these things. They're calling that innovation and learning. They wanted these things. They call that. So what do we call that? Aren't you seeing it as the same? Engagement, exploration is learning. We've got the same features coming up over and over again. Energy, engagement, and exploration seem to be recurrent themes, and they seem to be a top 3 for this organization. And Teresa Amabile, who's at Harvard, I think, she's done lots of work where she followed executives around where they fill in diaries every week. And she said the really important thing to understand about the workplace, she said, is that everybody is at work trying to make progress. And if they don't feel progress, that's where the resilience gets lost. And then they lose hope. And there's lots of resilience researchers who think that resilience is all about hope. There are others who will tell you it's actually about, can you make this make sense? If you can't make it make sense, that's when hope gets lost. So we've got something there, which is where the leadership kind of stuff kicks in. So a simple solution for you. This is an organization which starts with the engagement and the energy program here. What they did was they instituted a set coffee break time where everybody downed tools and went together and had coffee. And what you see happening is an 8% improvement in efficiency straight away. Find 8%. Go on. Just say quarter to 11. Everybody, let's go for a coffee. There you go, if that's true. Your challenge in terms of groups, the number of exchanges that you can make in a group follows a mathematical rule, and it doesn't follow the rule you want it to. Okay, so here's an example. This is the maths. Here's an example where you've got a group of 10 people. You've got 90 possible connections divided by 2. You've got 45 connections. Okay, so I'll show you that. It looks like that. Okay, so that's 3 people in your group, 7 people, 11 people, 14 people. Starting to get complicated. Every one of those can go wrong. Every one of them can go right. And it might be you don't need them all to go right. But let me show you this. If your group is 25, you've got 300. You'd think, well, it's 3 times that to get up to 75, isn't it? Oh, no, it's not. It's way more complicated than that. So scaling up puts in a great many more interchanges about the relationships, and the engagement patterns start to become much more challenging. So with upscaling, you start to lose that connection. So we lose resilience when we upscale unless we're very clever about our engagement strategy. If you think that doesn't matter, people are watching your company. They're watching your company because they want to be sure they're managing threat for themselves. What you see is this will tell us this. Employees are looking for their CEOs to be concerned with employee-related issues. They want to see you roll your sleeves up and do something. They don't believe the words, they believe the actions. Okay. So then, what you see here is that people look on companies about how they see the employees being treated and make estimates about whether they trust that company, even though they know nothing else about that company except how they think that the employees have been treated. And then 67% of them say they'll stop buying from that company if they don't like what they see in the employees. It affects the bottom line if you're selling. Okay? You've got to look after yourself as a leader. You've got to manage really carefully how you do these things. And you can't do everything. But what you'll see is sleep plays out quite extensively. So you've got to get some sleep, but you've got to find ways of dealing with that. Engagement, pay attention to other people, and then manage how you're thinking about things. So let's think about sleep, right? Massive problem, absolute massive problem. You have a wakefulness epidemic in your organization. Okay? Because we have it in society, okay? You can't sleep because of work stress and you can't work because of sleep deprivation. There's that desperate kind of cycle of things going on. All right, why? Because the anxiety center in your brain is almost indistinguishable from the sleep satisfaction center. So if you don't sleep properly, the anxiety center is set running, and if you're anxious, your sleep satisfaction center is set running. Isn't that maddening? How do you know if you're anxious? Your heart rate's up. If you're dehydrated, your heart rate goes up, you feel anxious, now you don't sleep properly. Much of sleep deprivation is due to dehydration. That's why we take people in expeditions up high, so they become dehydrated, and that makes them anxious, and then we see how they can handle it. That's why they go up there. They don't know that, but that's why they do it. In the organization, these are really important issues. They're all affected by sleep. They come out in these behaviors in terms of leaders and managers. So how much sleep do you need? This scale is applied there as well. Okay, can you see the lines almost always the same? Somewhere between 6.5 and 8 hours is optimum. It makes no difference how old you are. Okay, but look, where the curve comes down is lost performance, lost performance, lost performance. If you're sleeping over 8.5 hours, there's probably some reason for that, and you need to get that checked. If you're sleeping way under that in terms of the zone, outside the kind of 5-hour zone, you're in there, you're starting to get some real problems for the workplace. If you don't sleep properly, you don't decide wisely. You cannot be resilient in that scenario. Okay, you can try exercise if you want. This is an unusual study because it's people who exercise versus themselves, not compared to other people who don't exercise. This is you come to work on an exercise day, on a day, we'll send you a questionnaire, we say, are you going to exercise today or not? If you say no, okay, you've got to fill this in on a day when you're going to exercise. So Steve's in the group where they do that. They're doing it on a day when they don't exercise. You choose when you're not going to do it. Okay. You send it back to us. 2 weeks later, we'll send you the counterpart questionnaire, which is do it on a day when you're going to exercise. This group, we send you the first one is a day when you're going to exercise. Send it back to us. 2 weeks later, we send you the one for not exercising. So we've got a comparison. Okay. The value is about a 17% increment, always favoring the exercise scenario. Always. Okay, so these are 3 different scales, but you can score more in that one, more in that one, and that one. But the key thing to tell you now is the focus groups that we ran around it is telling you the kind of things that we were talking about. Can you see energization? So that energy that we talked about, NNX. Social interaction, exploration. People were talking to other people in the gym. They were talking to the bloke in finance about how we do that and how we do this. What about the bloke over there? How do we deal with that? This is white collar work. So this seems to be NXN. again, okay? Do better training. People are really frustrated by training that doesn't help people to do their job better. Most of the training that we see in the workplace doesn't follow up, and that's why it doesn't work. If there's no follow-up in your training programs, don't buy them, because that's not how learning works. You must have follow-up. Okay, so make sure you get that right. And this is an example here. In The Godfather filming, he couldn't remember his lines, so he had to hold the lines up. I mean, honestly. Teach people how to ask sensible questions. So in-house training. How can I succeed in spite of my circumstances? That's a really resilient kind of question to ask yourself. And actually helps get you back on instead of why it's terrible, what else is going on. There's something really good happening here. Think about the power of tiny gains. 1% better every day produces that. 1% worse every day produces that. Thinking about what people are not much good at, think about what they're great at and make them better at it. Now that really gets them flying, really gets them excited. Think about short time frames. If it's got to be done in a year, what can you do in a week? If it's got to be done in a month, what can you do in a day? If it's got to be done in a week, what can you do in the next hour? Get them so they get into action in a positive and constructive kind of way. Amateurs use goals, professionals use processes, and achievers use schedules. Think about how you can schedule things in a day as opposed to having to-do lists. Put them against a set time, because that gives them a way better chance of working than just having a goal. Okay? Help them to choose easy solutions from difficult solutions. That's a really difficult way to change how you've responded to something. Get yourself into a different situation. So I use this all the time with my colleagues at work. If you've got rooms where you go where you can't read, go to a different room. Your office often isn't a good place to read. Don't expect to do it there. Go somewhere else where you can do it. That's an easy solution rather than changing your attitude to the whole thing. So the whole thing about resilience in the workplace is you're going to be pushing the rock up forever because of so many factors, all interchanging all the time. It's going to require systems that work all the time. Okay? So remember, we are always vigilant to threat. Every new circumstance produces an employee who could feel threatened by it. Every new circumstance. They're watching the leaders all the time for signals because they're ultra vigilant. Okay, remember that it's about how we pay attention. It's socially reinforced, it's personally relevant, and they interact. They're not transactions. And it's all about engage, exploration, and energy. Those are the factors that really work out, and that's where we don't want to be. So check yourself out. How much stress are you experiencing? So this is a really good study. 2 identical dolphins. If you see them as different, you probably need to have a look at how you're doing things. Okay, remember, it's about the human in us all. So don't forget to look after yourself, because they'll watch you and you will start the hair running about threats if they don't see you doing well. Okay, I hope that's been useful to you. Thank you very much for your attention.